Hey guys, tonight we're dimming the lights for something even paler than your post-divorce complexion. The truly ghostly, prescription-powered existence of Victorian women. Not the candlelit, corseted Downton Abbey fantasy, but the real world of headaches, hysteria, and enough laudanum to flatten a horse. Welcome to the drugs that turned Victorian women into ghosts. So before you settle in, take a moment to like and subscribe. But only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Leave a comment telling me where you are listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, switch on a fan for that white noise, and get as comfortable as possible. But let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered what it actually felt like to be a Victorian woman? Did people really faint that much, or were they just trying to escape dinner conversation? How many nervous conditions could you rack up before your doctor prescribed a spa trip? Or just actual heroin? What was the etiquette for having a breakdown in public? And was it more or less embarrassing than accidentally calling your husband father? How many bottles of laudanum did it take before you started confusing your children with the wallpaper? And would you have survived a week of petticoats, societal pressure, and a women's tonic that was mostly brandy and regret? Congratulations. You've just woken up in 1873. Your doctor makes house calls, your corset is tight enough to crush your pancreas, and the only thing more dangerous than childbirth is the stuff in your medicine cabinet. Good luck. Rise and shine. It's breakfast time, and your options include weak tea, stale toast, and, if you're lucky, a splash of laudanum to take the edge off your existential dread. Nothing says good morning like starting your day with a tincture that's 10% opium, 90% hope. It's like a mimosa, but instead of brunch, you get light hallucinations. Let's set the scene. You open your eyes to the gentle chime of the maid laying out a tray, because alarm clocks haven't been invented yet. And the only thing louder than the sound of her footsteps is your own internal monologue. Is it morning already? Am I still alive? Do I have to be? Victorian breakfast is not about pleasure. It's about survival. The sun seeps in through heavy curtains, illuminating a table set with delicate china, a basket of bread so dry it could legally qualify as kindling, and a pot of tea that tastes like boiled regret. Coffee exists, but it's probably been rationed for the men of the house, who apparently need caffeine for all that important work. You, on the other hand, will settle for hot water with a memory of leaves. But wait. There's hope. Nestled among the condiments is a little blue bottle, hand-labelled in your apothecary's best Victorian penmanship. Laudanum, the secret weapon of every self-respecting Victorian woman. Just a few drops in your tea, and suddenly, the day seems slightly less horrifying. The edges blur, the bread softens, and you almost forget that your corset is cutting off circulation to half your vital organs. Now, let's talk oatmeal. Is it hearty, steaming, and nourishing? Not exactly. It's more of a suggestion. Pale, lumpy, and determinedly unsalted. Victorian nutritionists, if they existed, would have called it character building. You stare at the bowl, spoon hovering. Should you eat it? Feed it to the cat? Or simply let it ferment into a science project? No matter. With your daily dose of nerve tonic, maybe a spoonful of Dr. Fisher's invigorating elixir, which is mostly brandy and lies, anything tastes manageable. You sip your tea, already beginning to float, and look around the breakfast table. Across from you, your husband reads the Times and ignores you, unless you cough too loudly or seem to be having a visible emotion. The children are present in theory, but the governess keeps them at a safe distance, lest they accidentally inherit your fragile disposition. The maid stands by the door, ready to whisk away any uneaten food, all of it, or revive you if you start listing sideways. Outside, a milk cart rattles down the cobblestones, and you idly wonder whether the milkman spikes his deliveries with a little something extra. After all, Everyone you know seems to have their own morning routine. Some prefer Daffy's elixir, others rely on syrup of poppies. It's the original influencer wellness trend, what I take before 9 a.m. Except instead of adaptogens and collagen powder, it's straight-up narcotics and sugar water. You marvel, through your gently numbed haze, that anyone gets anything done. And yet, the empire runs on this stuff. The entire social order is held together by stiff upper lips and even stiffer doses of laudanum. There are a few moments of lucidity when you realize your breakfast isn't food. Your tea is basically a tranquilizer, and your main source of protein is the occasional floating crumb. Of course, the conversation at breakfast is as bland as the fare. You're expected to discuss the weather, the garden, perhaps an upcoming charity bazaar, but never your actual feelings. Those are for the doctor, and only if he's carrying his little black bag. If you seem a bit too lively, you'll be offered another spoonful of tonic. If you seem too quiet, same remedy. If you ask about politics, you might accidentally end up scheduled for a rest cure. As you finish your breakfast, you realize this meal isn't about nourishment or pleasure. It's about taking the edge off, drifting softly into another day, and hoping the laudanum kicks in before your mother-in-law stops by. Your stomach is empty, your mind is fuzzy, and your heart is just a little less heavy. Breakfast of champions, indeed. And so, with your laudanum swirling through your veins and a piece of toast lodged somewhere in your corset, you rise from the table, ready to face another day as a semi-corporeal Victorian ghost, gently haunting the parlor until it's time for your next dose. Time to get dressed. Start with a chemise, 2 layers of petticoats, and a corset that squeezes your ribcage so tightly your spleen files for emancipation. By the time you're laced in, you've burned 200 calories and have a sudden urge to swoon. Welcome to the original waist trainer, now with added shortness of breath. Let's begin with your chemise, the linen layer that's supposed to keep the rest of your clothes from scraping your skin off like a cheese grater. It's basically a long, oversized nightgown, and for about 3 seconds, you feel like maybe today will be comfortable. That delusion vanishes as soon as the petticoats come out. 1, then 2, maybe 3 if the weather's especially unforgiving. Each layer is designed to trap heat and humility. It's a wearable oven with an overcooked sense of modesty. You glance out the window and see your neighbor's laundry line flapping in the breeze. Rows of identical chemises, all desperately wishing to be pajamas. But you're not done yet. It's time for the main event, the corset. If you're lucky, you have a lady's maid to lace you in. If not, it's you, a mirror, and about 6 feet of laces that seem to knot themselves out of spite. You stand tall, arms up, and try not to breathe as the maid yanks the laces tight. The goal is simple: make your waist disappear, and your lungs question their place in this world. With every tug, you lose a little dignity and a few cubic centimeters of lung capacity. If you hear a rib crack, that's just a sign you're doing it right. If you don't, you're probably not tight enough. Corsets, after all, aren't about comfort. They're about shaping your silhouette into something straight out of a fashion plate, even if it means you faint before breakfast. The Victorians called it training your waist. Modern fitness influencers would call it a lawsuit. The corset transforms you from a person into a cautionary tale, a living hourglass. Ever try picking something up off the floor in a corset? It's less of a bend and more of a controlled collapse. You quickly learn that anything you drop is dead to you. Now add the rest. A starched collar, stockings held up by uncomfortable garters, shoes with more buttons than a Victorian typewriter, and an underskirt that could double as a tent in a windstorm. Each garment is an extra layer of fabric and frustration. Getting dressed is a cardio workout, a group project, and a slow-motion panic attack, all rolled into one. By the end, you're sweating profusely. Never let them see you sweat, by the way. It's not ladylike, and your pulse is higher than your hairline. It's not just the physical effort that gets you. There's a level of existential anxiety built in. Is your corset straight? Are your petticoats even? Did you accidentally lace your chemise in backwards? Is that faint ringing in your ears the sound of your body giving up, or just the distant church bell? Who knows? Victorian medicine says swooning is a sign of delicate femininity. So if you do collapse, you're really just performing gender at an Olympic level. And the smell, let's not skip over that. The average Victorian wardrobe is washed, at best, once a season. Under all those layers, things get medieval. If you're lucky, you have a little sachet of lavender or a spritz of rosewater to mask the aroma of slow-cooked human. For the most part, though, you're marinating. By the time you're finally dressed, you feel about as mobile as a porcelain doll and twice as fragile. Every movement is a negotiation. Sit too quickly, and your corset may fold in on itself like a bad soufflé. Stand too long, and your feet start to tingle as your blood supply gets rerouted to somewhere less important, like the neighbor's cat. The final touch is, of course, the hair. An updo that requires so many pins you could deflect musket fire. The end result is a Victorian woman ready to greet the day, upright, out of breath, and ready to faint at a moment's notice. You can't help but marvel at the sheer determination it takes just to leave the bedroom. You glance in the mirror, take one shallow breath, and step carefully into the hall, aware that one wrong move might trigger a full-scale cardiac event. And that's just your morning. Good luck. You shuffle through your morning chores, dusting the sideboard and staring blankly into the distance. Is that a vision of your dead grandmother? Or just the side effect of the calming syrup you took to stop the shakes? Either way, the silverware has never been shinier. The morning sunlight filters through thick velvet drapes, catching a glint on the polished brass candlesticks, each one buffed to a shine that could blind a moderately alert house cat. You've been up for hours, apparently, though time has lost most of its meaning somewhere between your second spoonful of laudanum and your third round of absent-mindedly rearranging the family's porcelain spaniel collection. Every shelf is dusted, every vase rotated to exactly the right angle. If there was an Olympic event for fluffing doilies while moderately sedated, you'd be up for the gold. Laudanum, of course, is the Victorian housewife's secret weapon. If the nerves start jangling, if the existential dread rises up around tea time, or if the memory of your husband's last attempt at poetry just won't fade, you know exactly where to find the blue bottle. Just a quick nip, and suddenly the relentless monotony of housework softens at the edges. Is the parlor haunted? Or are you just floating above it all, cleaning the same brass bell for the 5th time today? No matter, ghosts make for good company in the Victorian morning. At least they don't comment on your dusting technique, and dusting is just the beginning. The day's duties spiral outward, like a lace doily dropped on a spinning table. There are flowers to arrange, letters to sort, and rugs to beat until your arms ache, or until you forget which rug you started with. The kitchen needs inspecting, but you leave the actual cooking to the staff, if you're lucky enough to have any. If not, well, nothing adds zest to a dish quite like the possibility of seasoning it with a little opiate residue from your fingers. Dinner may be bland, but at least you'll hardly notice. You check on the laundry, crisp white linens hanging in the cold morning air. In theory, you're overseeing the process. In practice, you're meditating on the nature of soap while counting clouds and waiting for your next dose to settle your nerves. A faint buzzing in your ears, could be bees, could be side effects, reminds you that you haven't wounded the grandfather clock yet. You drift to the hallway, only to forget what you came for. Was it to polish the banister? Dust the painting of the Duke's aunt? Or was it simply to stand and contemplate the wallpaper until it starts to move? The other women in the house aren't faring much better. The cook sips her own tonic for female complaints, and the housemaid nibbles on Dr. Moffat's nerve drops as she scrubs the stairs. The dog spends half the day licking a patch of arsenic-infused wallpaper, and you're starting to think he's onto something. If a visitor rings the bell, you glide to the door in a haze, smile serenely, and hope you remember your own name. The real challenge is keeping up the facade of industry. Victorian etiquette demands that a respectable woman be busy, but not too busy. Cheerful, but not too cheerful. Competent, but never threateningly so. Your hands may polish the silver, but your mind drifts gently downstream, pondering what it all means, or, more realistically, what you'll have with your next cup of tea. A second helping of laudanum, or maybe just a bracing shot of Mother's Helper. And there are so many rules. Don't polish too vigorously, you'll chip the china. Don't stare too long out the window, you'll be accused of melancholia. And never, ever complain, unless it's in a letter to your sister, written in a careful hand so as not to alarm the servants. If you drop a spoon, you leave it for the maid. If you feel faint, you swoon gracefully onto the nearest fainting couch. There are 3 in every room, just in case. So the day ticks by, not with satisfaction, but with the peculiar hum of someone halfway between the world of chores and the world of dreams. By midday, you can't remember if you finished the dusting or if you just hallucinated an entire afternoon of it. Either way, the house is spotless, the silver gleams, and you've survived another round of Victorian domesticity on half a litre of laudanum, a deep breath, and the comforting thought that tomorrow you get to do it all over again. It's time for a neighbourly call. But you're not just swapping gossip, you're exchanging tips on which doctor prescribes the best nerve tonic. Would you prefer a dash of cocaine in your tea, or do you find strychnine gives a brighter edge to your social anxiety? You slip on your best gloves. Never mind that you're trembling a little, and smooth your skirts with the careful dignity of a woman who's had 3 doses of laudanum before lunch. As you step out, the fresh air slaps your cheeks and reminds you there is a world beyond the drawing room. The neighbourhood, with its neat rows of hedges and suspiciously uniform flower beds, is alive with the quiet drama of women visiting each other, each one a little more transparent and twitchy than the last. You arrive at Mrs. Ellingsworth's, where the door is opened by a maid who looks like she's just sampled the household cordial. The parlour is awash in gentle sunlight, and the faint aroma of mothballs, lemon polish, and enough volatile chemicals to power a small pharmacy. The ritual begins. A polite kiss on the cheek, a compliment about your hat, a careful negotiation about which chair won't collapse under your nervous energy. Tea is brought in, a silver tray laden with delicate cups, lemon slices, and a small vial of something special discreetly tucked behind the cream jug. Mrs. Ellingsworth, always the hostess, raises an eyebrow in silent inquiry. Will you have the usual, dear, or shall we try Dr. McGillicuddy's new and improved nerve elixir, guaranteed to cure everything but the common husband? You both titter, the sound a little too high-pitched, like a kettle coming to boil. The tea itself is a minefield. Some prefer it straight, while others stir in the tiniest pinch of cocaine for clarity, or a few drops of tincture of strychnine for vitality. You ponder your options. Would you like your hands to shake from anxiety or from experimental pharmaceuticals? Victorian England, after all, is all about choices. The only real mistake is to show up without an anecdote about a doctor whose concoction left you seeing double or, worse, actually feeling better. Conversation drifts from weather, always untrustworthy, to fashion, always suffocating, to the latest scandal, always delightful. But, beneath the polite smiles, there's a competitive edge. Who has the best prescription? Whose apothecary is most discreet? Oh, I hear Mrs. Fothergill has switched to chloral hydrate. Last week she recited the whole of Tennyson backward before tea was even poured. You nod appreciatively, making a mental note to try that next time you can't sleep. Of course, it's not all about the medicines. There's an art to these social rituals, a careful choreography of concern, empathy, and just the right amount of schadenfreude. "You must come for dinner next week," Mrs. Ellingsworth says, "but only if you promise to bring that divine cherry cordial you get from Dr. Hargrove. It's understood." The cordial is 90% spirits, with a hint of whatever root or bark was fashionable last season. Between sips, you exchange tips for dealing with the vapors, smelling salts and a brisk walk, and lady headaches, opium or failing that, a firm lie-down and a blanket over the head. You both agree that Mrs. Shaw across the lane has gone too far, mixing her laudanum with sherry. She'll be seeing spirits by Christmas, Mrs. Ellingsworth whispers, which is met with a knowing laugh. Most of you already are. Every so often, a servant brings in a plate of sandwiches or a tray of little cakes, none of which you taste. Eating would only dilute the subtle effects of your afternoon chemistry experiment. The conversation drifts back to family. Children who don't nap, husbands who don't notice when you swap their shaving soap for carbolic acid just to see what happens. There's comfort in the shared absurdity, the whispered confessions, the delicate balancing act of keeping it all together while quietly coming undone. Eventually, you rise to leave. Cheeks flushed, mind humming, a little less sure of your place in the world, and a little more certain you'll be back tomorrow. As you step into the pale afternoon light, you realize that in Victorian society, friendship is forged over tea, sympathy, and just enough strychnine to keep things interesting. Feeling faint? Can't stop crying? Congratulations, you've got hysteria. Victorian medicine's answer to every problem a woman ever had. Symptoms include being alive, having opinions, and sometimes just standing still for too long. In the grand medical wisdom of the 19th century, hysteria is less a diagnosis and more of a catch-all for any emotional turbulence, inconvenient outburst, or unladylike inclination. Have you recently laughed too loudly, expressed frustration about your third cousin's engagement, or become visibly bored at the dinner table? Sorry, that's hysteria. The doctors, overwhelmingly male and suspiciously unburdened by corsets, are unanimous. The uterus, they claim, is simply roaming around your body, causing mischief and spiritual mayhem. It's basically a hormonal poltergeist. Your first warning sign is usually a gentle suggestion from a family member. Perhaps you're feeling delicate? Suddenly, everyone is an expert on your internal organs. Mother recommends a brisk walk in the garden. Aunt Lavinia says you should eat more boiled turnip. And your husband, after reading an alarming article in The Lancet, insists you see Dr. Wainscott immediately. Dr. Wainscott is 40% sideburn, 60% medical optimism, and he's got a special fondness for diagnosing female complaints. The visit is an experience. You're led into a parlor where the wallpaper is only slightly more faded than the doctor's enthusiasm. He asks probing questions. Have you been sleeping? Do you find yourself longing for excitement? Are you, by any chance, thinking? Each yes is one step closer to a full-blown case of hysteria. You're prodded, questioned, and sent home with a prescription for absolute bed rest, nerve tonics, and instructions not to read novels, too stimulating. The prescription is almost comically unhelpful. Bed rest sounds relaxing until you realize it means weeks in a dimly lit room, forbidden to move, read, or have anything resembling fun. You're to avoid excitement, exertion, or even lively conversation. If you're especially lucky, a nurse will monitor your pulse and adjust your pillows every half hour while you stare at the ceiling and wonder if the cracks are spelling out messages from the spirit world. Rest cure, they call it. But it feels suspiciously like being gently entombed. Of course, the nerve tonics are always within reach. Some are laudanum, some are morphine, some are made from what appears to be ground-up hope and cheap alcohol. If you're fortunate, the tonic will simply make you pleasantly drowsy. If not, you might start hearing the wallpaper whisper about the futility of your existence. The true absurdity of the diagnosis is that hysteria covers everything. If you cry, you're hysterical. If you don't cry, you're suppressing your hysteria and it might burst forth at any moment. If you eat too much, that's suspicious. If you eat too little, very concerning. If you laugh, if you frown, if you get a headache, if you are simply tired of this relentless parade of restrictions and opinions, the answer is always the same: hysteria. It's the medical equivalent of saying, try turning it off and on again, except you are the machine and no one can find the plug. Naturally, the treatments get creative. There are pelvic massages, a therapy so awkward it should come with a warning label and a fainting couch. Cold baths, hot compresses, electric shock, and in severe cases, a restful trip to the countryside, preferably somewhere with very few books and even fewer opportunities to speak. Anything, it seems, to keep a woman still, silent, and safely away from her own brain. The result? You become a ghost in your own home, drifting through rooms in a haze of sedatives and enforced boredom. The men congratulate themselves on your improved calmness. You, meanwhile, perfect the art of looking serene while quietly plotting your escape, if only you had the energy. So, as another fainting spell looms and Dr. Wainscott stands ready with his tinctures and opinions, remember, in Victorian England, hysteria isn't just a diagnosis. It's a career path, a lifestyle, and a gentle reminder that sometimes the real sickness is just living in the 19th century as a woman with a pulse and a thought. The doctor arrives, carrying a leather bag that's less medical kit and more party starter. You're prescribed laudanum for your nerves, morphine for your headaches, and maybe some chloroform if you're really lucky. Insurance? That's just whether you survive until dinner. He's here on his weekly rounds, top hat slightly askew, moustache bristling with authority, and the look of a man who's seen far too many cases of female agitation and not nearly enough hand sanitizer. You hear the front door creak and feel a ripple of anticipation. Will it be the day you're given something new? Or just a refill of your old favorites? The maid lets him into the sitting room, where you're already positioned on the fainting couch, surrounded by lace, doilies, and at least 3 unnecessary pillows. He asks how you're feeling, but it's less of a question and more of a formality. Victorian medicine is all about the performance. You sigh theatrically and list your symptoms: headache, sleeplessness, a peculiar buzzing in your ears, and a general sense that you might at any moment dissolve into mist. He nods gravely, jots something illegible in his notebook, and announces his plan: a good strong tonic, a little rest, and, if the nerves persist, a touch of morphia, perhaps a drop of chloroform for your occasional distress. It's hard not to be impressed by the sheer variety of your prescription. The average Victorian medicine cabinet could put a modern rave to shame. There's laudanum, of course, the old reliable, dispensed by the spoonful or, if you're especially anxious, by the teacup. Morphine tablets for severe discomfort. Translation: a mild headache, a stubbed toe, or the unmitigated horror of an unannounced visit from your mother-in-law. Chloroform for those truly inconvenient fits of nerves, applied delicately to a handkerchief and held under your nose until your worries and consciousness float away. If you ask for something for your appetite, he'll hand you a bottle labeled beef, iron, and wine, which tastes like a metallic foot soaked in sherry but is guaranteed to restore the constitution, or at least distract you with its flavor. For a cough, there's Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup, beloved by children, feared by livers. For female complaints, you get an elixir with a name like Dr. Frobisher's uterine repose, featuring a proprietary blend of alcohol, opium, and what might honestly be pond water. He checks your pulse and asks after your dreams, which is a delicate way of probing for overexcitement. Reading novels? Gardening too energetically? Speaking in complete sentences? Careful, those are all risk factors for a sudden uptick in prescriptions. If you admit to troubling thoughts, he'll up the laudanum. If you seem a little too lively, perhaps it's time for a sedative. The solution is always found in the bottom of a bottle or the cloud of a chemical vapor. After a thorough examination, meaning he asks you 3 questions and presses a hand to your forehead with the clinical seriousness of a man checking if his toast is too hot, he offers a few final pieces of advice. Rest, avoid anything exciting, and don't let the maid read French novels in your presence. He may suggest a change of scenery, perhaps a trip to the seaside, or a few weeks at a sanatorium, where you'll be prescribed even more drugs, but with a better view. Before he leaves, he lines up your new bottles on the sideboard, all corked and carefully labelled, as if displaying trophies from his pharmacological adventures. He tips his hat, collects his fee, more than the cook earns in a month, and disappears in a swirl of cologne and false hope. You're left surveying your loot, row upon row of shimmering glass, each promising serenity, sleep, or, at the very least, a few hours of glorious detachment from reality. As the door closes, you wonder if next week's visit will bring anything different, or if you'll just keep collecting bottles like Victorian Pokemon. One thing is certain: in this era, the doctor doesn't heal you. He equips you to float through the world, half awake, half dreaming, and never quite certain if the headache is gone or if you've just misplaced it somewhere between the laudanum and the morphine. In the end, the true prescription is always the same. Keep calm, take your medicine, and hope for a better cure by dessert. For the truly delicate, there's the rest cure, weeks of lying in bed with nothing to do except take your medicine and ponder the ceiling cracks. It's like a spa day if spas were invented by Edgar Allan Poe. The moment your doctor prescribes the rest cure, you know life is about to slow down to the pace of a very anxious snail. No more housework, no more walks in the garden, and certainly no more reading the newspaper, which, as everyone knows, is dangerous for feminine brains. Your days are now carefully curated by a well-meaning nurse and the steady ticking of the grandfather clock, broken only by the arrival of your hourly dose of sedative, and, occasionally, someone to fluff your pillows and remind you not to think too hard. The rest cure isn't about relaxation, but about absolute inertia. Your bed, once a place for sleep, is now your entire world. The window is cracked open to let in some healing air, but you're not allowed to leave the covers unless it's for the bathroom. Or, in severe cases, even that's discouraged. You're visited daily by your doctor, who peers at you with the intensity of a zookeeper examining a particularly depressed flamingo, then prescribes more of the same. Stay put, don't talk, and above all, don't get ideas. Meals are small and bland, broth, dry toast, and the occasional overcooked egg, all meant to keep your digestive system as calm as your nerves. If you ask for a book, your nurse shakes her head. No stimulation, dear. We don't want your mind racing. If you request a visit from a friend, that's too much excitement. Your only regular company is the nurse, whose conversational skills hover somewhere between local librarian and soothing background hum. She'll spoon-feed you medicine at all hours, keeping careful track of your doses, laudanum, bromide, valerian, and anything else the doctor thinks will keep you peacefully pinned to the mattress. Time passes in peculiar ways when you're forbidden from doing anything. You become obsessed with the ceiling, the patterns in the plaster, the slow-moving cracks, the occasional spider, whom you name Gerald for companionship. Sometimes you count the flowers on the wallpaper, then lose your place, then start again. You measure the sunlight as it creeps along the wall and wonder if you could harness it to signal a message to the outside world. You daydream about walking, or even just standing up without being chastised for overexertion. Your legs, unaccustomed to movement, feel less like limbs and more like elaborate props in a medical experiment. The rest cure, despite its innocent-sounding name, isn't particularly restful. Your thoughts get loopier by the day, partly from the laudanum, partly from boredom. Some women go quietly mad. Some compose epic poetry in their heads, and some just make plans to run away at the first opportunity. Occasionally, you drift into a dreamlike state where the line between sleep and waking is as blurry as Victorian medical ethics. When you try to express how you feel, frustrated, listless, or just deeply tired of doing nothing, the answer is always the same: more rest, more medicine, less talking. The rest cure isn't just about physical stillness. It's a kind of enforced invisibility, a way of keeping delicate women out of the way, out of trouble, and out of conversation. Your family visits, but only briefly. She needs quiet, the nurse insists, ushering them out before you can ask them to smuggle in a crossword puzzle or a magazine. Your only rebellion is a slightly sharper tone when you say thank you for the broth. Eventually, after weeks of this therapeutic imprisonment, you emerge blinking into the light. Are you rested? Not exactly. You're weak, wobbly, and 10% more transparent than when you started. But the doctors are pleased. You're calm, compliant, and unlikely to run off to join the circus, at least for a week or two. So you thank your doctor, tip your nurse, and resume your life, now equipped with a deep appreciation for fresh air, upright posture, and even the most mundane of errands. The rest cure is over, and you survived, not by getting stronger, but by becoming the world's most docile, lightly sedated Victorian houseplant. Congratulations. The children are screaming. You'd comfort them, but your limbs are a little too floppy, and the wallpapers started moving again. Victorian motherhood. Half heroism, half out of body experience. It's 9 a.m., and the nursery is already vibrating at a pitch only dogs and desperate mothers can hear. The baby's teething, the toddler's attempting to climb the curtains, and someone has spilled porridge in a way that would make Jackson Pollock proud. You, meanwhile, are doing your best impression of a serene maternal statue, propped up by a fortifying dose of Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup, a trusted friend whose main ingredient is morphine, with a dash of alcohol and just a hint of parental regret. You try to focus, but your mind is foggier than a November morning on the Thames. In one hand you hold a rattle. In the other, the famous blue bottle that promises peace and quiet. If not for the children, at least for you. Victorian child rearing is an athletic feat, and the only equipment provided is a rocking chair, a pair of worn-out slippers, and a pharmaceutical starter pack that would give a modern pharmacist a nervous breakdown. Somewhere in the background, the nursemaid is valiantly negotiating a ceasefire between siblings, wielding a spoonful of laudanum-laced gripe water, with the kind of expertise that comes from long experience and a short fuse. The family dog, perhaps the wisest creature in the house, has sensibly retreated to a spot under the sofa, ears flat against his head, waiting for the morphine fog to lift. You catch a glimpse of yourself in the gilt-edged mirror. There you are, hair askew, eyes a little wild, lips pursed in that classic Victorian, don't you dare expression. You're not quite sure if you're floating above the chaos, or if the floorboards have actually started to rise up and meet you. Either way, you soldier on. After all, a mother's work is never done, especially if work means watching your child try to eat a shoe while you try to remember what shoes are for. It's not all disaster. There are moments of real affection, sticky fingers clutching your hand, soft cheeks pressed to your shoulder, the giddy relief when everyone's asleep and you get 5 minutes to yourself with a magazine and your favorite sedative. You tell yourself these are the golden years, but mostly they're sepia-toned, gently blurred by narcotics and exhaustion. The family portrait is a little fuzzy around the edges, but everyone is present, more or less. Society expects you to be the perfect Victorian mother. Attentive, cheerful, eternally patient, and always presentable. Nobody mentions the mother's helper in your apron pocket, or the fact that half the neighborhood mothers are also gently bobbing along in a laudanum haze. You swap recipes for poppy syrup at tea, compare notes on the best teething powders, and pretend not to notice when the other mothers start speaking in run-on sentences that trail off into soft, contented sighs. Still, there are dangers. The medicine makes you dreamy, but it also dulls your reflexes. There's a constant, underlying anxiety. What if you miss something important? What if you accidentally dose the dog? What if the children start asking questions you can't answer? Like, why is the sky blue? Or why does the wallpaper have so many faces? No one prepares you for that. But you persevere. Because even with one eye open and one foot in dreamland, you're still the center of the household universe. You wipe noses, tie shoes, pat backs, and whisper bedtime stories you can barely remember yourself. At night, you hover by their beds, listening for breaths, reassured by the rise and fall of tiny chests and the dull ache of your own bones. You promise yourself tomorrow you'll have more energy, more patience, more presence. Tomorrow you'll try to do it all without a chemical assist. Tomorrow you'll be the mother you imagined, not just the one who made it through the day. For now, you settle for survival. You hug your children, straighten the covers, and hope the morphine wears off before someone decides to redecorate with finger paint and jam. Victorian motherhood, equal parts devotion, delirium, and the determination to keep going, even if you're not entirely sure where you're going or how you'll get there. Even running errands isn't safe. The apothecary's shelves are lined with bottles promising relief from headaches, heartbreak, and probably taxes. If you faint in the haberdashery, don't worry. The smelling salts are on special. Your to-do list is simple. Pick up some buttons, replace the broken hairpins, and purchase a few household necessities. In a modern world, this would be a breezy trip to the local big box store. But in Victorian England, it's an Olympic event. One that involves 3 petticoats, a bonnet the size of a small parasol, and nerves so frazzled you could use them to hem your skirt. Stepping into the apothecary is like walking into an alternate dimension where every ailment, real or imagined, has its own liquid cure. The shelves gleam with bottles in shades of cobalt and emerald, each with a handwritten label: tincture of opium, elixir of life, Dr. Fenwick's soothing syrup, Mrs. Dalloway's cordial for female troubles. Each promises to restore your youth, your vigor, and possibly your missing will to live. A headache? Laudanum. Anxiety? Chloral hydrate. Husband coming home for lunch? Double dose. You move through the aisles, keeping one gloved hand on the counter for stability. Everywhere you look, the shelves are crowded with solutions to problems you didn't even know you had. The pharmacist, cheerful and rosy-cheeked, is happy to recommend a bottle for every occasion. Something for the nerves, madam? Or perhaps a little tonic for the digestion? He winks, as if the whole world is in on the secret. Everyone's medicating. Even the local vicar can't face a Sunday sermon without a sip of tonic. With your remedies acquired, you sweep out into the marketplace. Next stop, the haberdasher, where the combination of mothballs, perfumed sachets, and cramped quarters could knock out a medium-sized ox. It's no wonder women faint so often. In fact, fainting is practically a competitive sport. There's always a lady slumped dramatically in the corner, surrounded by concerned onlookers and opportunistic sales clerks. Don't worry, the haberdasher keeps a tray of smelling salts at the ready, right next to the embroidery floss. You take your place in the ever-moving line of delicate shoppers, trying not to swoon before you've purchased the necessary lace. Every step is a negotiation with your corset, your aching feet, and the persistent dizziness brought on by the morning's soothing tonic. The world blurs slightly at the edges, and for a moment, you're not sure if you're standing in a shop or floating through a dream constructed entirely of ribbons and receipts. If you manage to make it to the grocer, things only get stranger. Victorian produce is less about nutrition and more about survival. Apples with spots, bread so dense it could be weaponized, and cabbages that seem to multiply in your basket. The grocer offers you a sample of his wife's special jam, which tastes suspiciously of gin. You nod politely and make a mental note to try it in your tea next time you need to calm your nerves. Errands, in theory, should be a welcome change of pace, a chance to see and be seen. In practice, you and every other woman in town are held together by starch, social anxiety, and a daily rotation of questionable pharmaceuticals. You compare notes with a friend outside the milliner's. What did your doctor recommend for nerves? 3 drops of opium in the afternoon, but only if I feel a turn coming on. You both laugh, then discreetly adjust your bonnets and brace for the next shop. By noon, you've acquired enough patent medicine to open your own side business and enough supplies to keep the household from falling apart for another week. You wobble home, arms full, head spinning, the faint smell of lavender and ammonia trailing behind you like a calling card. In the end, Victorian shopping is less about acquiring things and more about surviving the ordeal with your dignity and consciousness intact. As you unload your purchases, you realize you forgot the hairpins, but at least you've got 3 new bottles of laudanum and a packet of smelling salts. Maybe next week you'll remember the soap. For now, a spoonful of Mrs. Dalloway's cordial and a nap will do just fine. A night at the opera. The music swells, your head swims, and before Act 2 you're slumped over the balcony, whispering to Queen Victoria's ghost. Was it the aria or the after-dinner morphine lozenge? Your evening begins long before the curtain rises, with 3 hours of elaborate preparation. The dress, of course, is a masterpiece of silk, velvet, and strategically placed boning, designed to impress the other wives, make your rivals jealous, and ensure you never quite get enough air into your lungs. A tiara, borrowed, inherited, or cleverly imitated, perches atop your elaborate hairdo, which has been lacquered into submission with enough pomade to waterproof a river barge. You check the mirror for the 10th time, making sure your cheeks are the appropriate shade of nervous pallor and your gloves are spotless, ready for an evening of genteel self-suffocation. Carriages crowd the street outside the opera house. Each one releases another wave of overdressed, undernourished aristocrats into the cool night air. You join the tide, trying not to trip on your hem or topple over from the combined effects of laudanum and social anxiety. Inside, the gaslights flicker, dazzling the crowd with an amber glow and threatening to asphyxiate anyone who lingers too long in the lobby. A faint scent of perfume, pomade, and tightly coiled nerves fills the air. Seated in your private box, or the best one you could secure without pawning the family silver, you take in the scene. Everyone is watching everyone else. An endless, silent contest for status and attention. Conversation is whispered behind fans and folded programs. Your seatmate, Lady Chumbly, leans in and confides that she's on her 3rd digestive tonic of the evening, which might explain why her hat is slightly askew and her laughter comes in unpredictable bursts. A footman discreetly hands you a small tin of morphine lozenges for your nerves. You slip one under your tongue because it's rude to refuse, and anyway, the overture is especially stressful tonight. The lights dim and the orchestra begins. The tenor hits a note so high your corset shivers. You dab your forehead with a monogrammed handkerchief and pray that the swelling strings drown out the pounding in your ears. Music and morphine swirl together in your mind until the world takes on a faint golden haze. The prima donna launches into her famous aria, a tale of love, loss, and probably tuberculosis. Your vision blurs. Was that a tear in your eye? Or just a reaction to the ether drifting up from the orchestra pit? By Act 2, you're not entirely sure where you end and the opera begins. You lean over the balcony, half expecting to see Queen Victoria herself floating among the chandeliers. Your head grows heavy, your hands tremble delicately, and the only thing holding you upright is the rigid geometry of your dress. Lady Chumbly whispers, "Should we call for your smelling salts?" You wave her off with a weak smile. Fainting is practically a social ritual. No one blinks twice as you slide gracefully into your seat, eyelids fluttering. Spirit somewhere between here and the spirit world. During intermission, the ladies' retiring room is packed. Soft couches line the walls, and every surface is occupied by swooning debutantes and matrons alike, all being revived with lavender water, salts, or a discreet sip of restorative cordial. The gossip swirls thicker than the cologne. Did you see Lady Abernathy? Out cold before the first curtain. Countess Warwick claims her nerves are better. but I saw her sneak a dose of opium drops between acts. Everyone shares a knowing nod. Nobody expects you to last the whole performance conscious. When the final curtain falls, you are bundled back into your carriage, head spinning, heart fluttering, and eardrums still ringing from both the music and your own pulse. It hardly matters whether you remember a single note. What counts is that you were seen, you swooned with style, and you managed not to topple headfirst into the orchestra. As you drift home, you reflect that in Victorian society, fainting at the opera is less a sign of frailty and more a badge of honor, proof that you're playing the game exactly as it's meant to be played, melodramatic, medicated, and just barely upright. In a society obsessed with delicacy, nothing's more fashionable than looking faint, frail, and slightly see-through. Pale skin, sunken eyes, and a general air of, "Is she okay?" are this season's hottest trends. It starts with your complexion. The paler, the better. You want to look as if you've never so much as glanced at the sun, or possibly food. A faint blue vein at your temple is considered highly desirable. You might be a little anemic, a touch consumptive, and absolutely translucent by candlelight. In Victorian England, healthy glow is a medical emergency, not a compliment. People cross the street to avoid you if you have too much color, obviously contagious. But if you appear to be on the verge of spontaneous fainting, congratulations, you're a trendsetter. How do you achieve the look? First, avoid fresh air and sunshine at all costs. Gardens are for viewing from a distance, preferably through a window. If you must go outside, a wide-brimmed hat, a veil, and a generous application of lead-based face powder will protect your delicate epidermis from the vulgarity of ultraviolet light. Some women go the extra mile and dab vinegar or lemon juice on their skin to achieve that coveted, just exhumed glow. If you're a real overachiever, you can always claim you're delicate-chested, so any sign of outdoor exercise is strictly forbidden. Sunken eyes are all the rage. And not just because you haven't slept in 3 years. Dark circles are a badge of honor. Evidence of a life filled with poetry, night sweats, and probably a fair amount of laudanum. Nothing says wealth and refinement like looking haunted by both family secrets and a lack of vitamin D. The women's magazines helpfully suggest subtle shadowing under the eyes, achieved with a dab of charcoal, provided you can do so without accidentally poking yourself in the eye and adding a real injury to your list of ailments. It's not enough to look pale. You must also act the part, move slowly, speak softly, and never show enthusiasm for anything except perhaps a quiet moment of introspection or an especially moving passage from Byron. If you sneeze, do it delicately. If you cough, make sure it's a nervous cough, not a productive one, or you'll risk being labeled common. Lean into doorways, gaze out of windows, and occasionally rest your head on your hand, as if the weight of existence is simply too much. If people ask if you're unwell, smile faintly and murmur something about the vapors or a touch of melancholy. Clothes help sell the look. Soft, floating fabrics in muted colors are in vogue, especially those that billow mournfully as you glide down the hall. Starched collars and tight corsets will restrict your movement and, as a bonus, contribute to the overall impression of fragility. Try not to eat too much in public. If you must, nibble a single biscuit and decline the rest with a weary sigh. The cult of the pale has its own unofficial hierarchy. The truly elite can faint on command, producing a scene so dramatic that the nearest gentleman nearly drops his monocle. If you happen to cough up a little blood on a handkerchief, you'll be the toast of the next salon, until someone finds out it's just a bit of beetroot juice for dramatic effect. Underlying all this is a quiet competition. Who can look the most like a tragic heroine? Who will attract the most concerned glances from relatives and potential suitors? There's even an undercurrent of jealousy. Did you hear Lady Arabella fainted at the painter's studio? The doctor was summoned and everything. Simply divine. If you're lucky, someone will write a poem about your sickly beauty and your mysterious, possibly fatal malaise. But make no mistake, looking like a corpse is hard work. It takes discipline, creativity, and the willingness to forego most modern concepts of nutrition, sunblock, and mental health. Yet, for a Victorian woman, there's no greater compliment than being described as delicate, ethereal, and very nearly not of this earth. So as you dab on your arsenic-laced powder and practice your frail, faraway smile, remember, the real goal isn't to live forever, but to look absolutely stunning while nearly dying. This season, pale is powerful, and nothing says status like looking one fever away from immortality. Your husband wonders why you're so quiet these days. You wonder if he'd notice if you swapped his brandy for your laudanum. Welcome to Victorian marriage, where the only thing more oppressive than the patriarchy is your prescription. It's evening, and the household falls into its ritual hush. Your husband retreats to the study, his private domain, surrounded by leather-bound volumes, brandy decanter at hand, and the world's heaviest armchair. He'll spend an hour or two reading the papers and brooding over his investments, which mostly involves sighing loudly enough for everyone in the house to hear. Meanwhile, you remain in the drawing room, fingers curled tightly around your embroidery hoop, stitching the same rows for the third week in a row, because concentration is for people who don't have laudanum floating through their bloodstream. You aren't alone, not really. The room is filled with quiet melancholies. The clock ticking, the fire hissing, the faint echoes of a piano somewhere upstairs, played softly, always softly. In your pocket, close to your heart and well out of your husband's sight, is a little glass vial. You never leave it out, never mention it, and certainly never list it among your household expenses. It's your secret, a tiny, potent rebellion against a life that sometimes feels like a long corridor, all doors locked from the outside. Your husband tries to make conversation at dinner, but only about topics that require no actual input from you. The new footman seems decent, he says. The price of coal is appalling. Did you hear about the minister's wife? You nod and murmur, smiling just enough to keep him from asking questions. Sometimes, you imagine what would happen if you told him everything. About the emptiness, the hours spent staring out the window, the dreams that vanish the moment you wake. But then you remember, Victorian marriage isn't built for sharing, only for surviving. Your melancholy is both invisible and inescapable. Society says a married woman should be grateful for her security, her respectability, her place in the world. But the truth is, you're expected to be content with crumbs, the compliment on a Sunday bonnet, the approval when you don't embarrass him at dinner, the quiet praise for being such a good wife. Real feelings, anger, sadness, longing, are to be smothered with politeness, asphyxiated with etiquette. If they slip through, there's always your prescription to keep them in check. The secret stash isn't just laudanum. There's also soothing syrup, for when the nerves get especially jangly. Tonic wine, for afternoons that stretch on forever. And sometimes, if the mood is especially dark, a few drops of tincture of opium in your evening tea. You and your friends don't talk about these things outright, but there's an understanding, a conspiratorial glint in the eye at tea, a knowing smile as someone produces a flask just for medicinal purposes. Even the cook knows to leave you be when you drift, glassy-eyed, through the kitchen in search of something you can't quite name. You wonder sometimes if your husband suspects. Perhaps he chalks it up to female troubles, or the general delicacy of the fairer sex. Maybe he's grateful for your quietness, your reliability, your absence of visible complaint. Maybe he genuinely doesn't see you at all. Most nights, you both drift into bed, lying side by side like actors waiting for the curtain to fall. He snores, you stare at the ceiling, counting cracks and planning tomorrow's excuses for why you can't join him at church or dinner or anywhere else that requires full consciousness. Still, the secret stash gives you small, private mercies. A little escape, a gentle floating, a moment of peace. Sometimes, You almost remember what happiness felt like before it was buried beneath layers of lace, protocol, and expectation. On rare evenings, the melancholy lifts, and you almost feel bold enough to slip into your husband's study and pour his brandy down the sink. But the moment passes, and you settle for another measured dose, another quiet sigh, another night survived. Victorian marriage is less about partnership and more about parallel play. Two people in the same house, living side by side, each with their own secret stash. The difference is, only one of you knows it's the best part of the day. Got a headache? Of course you do. The answer: Bayer's heroin syrup, straight from the pharmacy to your fainting couch. Why risk a bad mood when you could just slip gently into a chemical coma? In the grand tradition of Victorian self-care, your medicine cabinet is the envy of every pharmacist and the despair of every modern toxicologist. If you aren't sipping laudanum with breakfast, you're uncorking a bottle of heroin syrup for your mid-afternoon slump. This isn't just a quick fix, it's a lifestyle, the ultimate answer to the relentless parade of headaches, heartbreak, and household despair. Because in Victorian England, the only thing more common than bad weather is an ache that needs soothing. Headaches strike with the reliability of the church bell. They arrive for any and all reasons: a tight corset, a tense conversation, the wrong kind of rain, or just the effort of existing through another day of polite repression. Maybe it's the gas lamps, the constant odor of boiled cabbage, or the sound of your neighbor's piano practicing scales for the 10th consecutive hour. Whatever the cause, the solution is always the same. Reach for the bottle, pour a generous dose, and let the room go soft around the edges. Heartbreak, meanwhile, is practically an epidemic. Lost loves, disappointing suitors, the endless treadmill of social climbing, or simply the soul-sapping realization that this is your life forever. These are all valid triggers. Victorian society does not reward big feelings. If you cry, you're delicate. If you don't cry, you're cold. If you sigh too much, someone will prescribe a sedative. Either way, a spoonful of heroin syrup will melt the sharp corners off your disappointment and leave you humming faintly with resignation. The beauty of Bayer's heroin syrup, besides the fact that it actually contained heroin, is its universal promise: relief from absolutely everything. Head hurts? Syrup. Can't sleep? Syrup. Nerves jangling from too many animated discussions about the price of mutton? Double syrup. The pharmacist will assure you it's non-addictive. And as long as you don't read the fine print, or indeed, ever stop taking it, you might even believe him. It's not just you. The entire household is a carousel of medicated maladies. The children are sipping soothing syrup, morphine and chloroform. Anyone? The cook keeps a secret stash of tonic bitters for her own headaches, and your husband never says no to an invigorating cordial after supper. You could line up every bottle in the house and spell out the word numb in amber glass. Sometimes you wonder if your best friend even likes you, or if she's just here for the free samples from your medicine shelf. Of course, the side effects are as Victorian as the cure. There's the lightheadedness, the occasional urge to recite poetry backwards, the gentle sensation of your feet not quite touching the ground. You float through the parlor, smiling beatifically at nothing in particular, and occasionally lose track of entire afternoons. The only downside is the next day's fog, a sluggish, slow-motion kind of melancholy that settles in your bones and makes the piano scales sound almost soothing. If you mention your symptoms to the doctor, he'll simply recommend a change of brand, or a stronger syrup, or perhaps a little more time resting with the curtains drawn. The cycle repeats: pain, potion, peace, and then a soft, syrupy slide into another day. Real problems aren't solved, just gently anesthetized. In public, you maintain appearances. You wave away offers of tea and smile through conversations you can barely follow. If anyone asks how you're feeling, you simply say, "Much better, thank you." In private, You lie back on your fainting couch, bottle in hand, and let the chemical comfort wash over you. And so, in the world of Victorian womanhood, headaches and heartbreak never stand a chance. With the right syrup, you can drift through every disappointment, every migraine, and every melancholy morning, safe in the knowledge that, for a few blissful hours, nothing can touch you, not even your own feelings. Nighttime. You'd like to sleep, but the anxiety, the noise, and the ever-present fear of being unladylike keep you awake. Good thing you've got a little bottle by your bed labeled, "For gentle repose, ingredients, mostly dreams, partly danger." The day is finally done. The servants have banked the fires. The family has settled into their respective beds. And the world outside has quieted to a dull, misty hush. But you, Victorian woman of mystery and nerves, lie awake, staring at the crack in the ceiling and waiting for your mind to stop racing. Sleep is the one luxury you cannot summon on command. Every creak of the house, every distant carriage wheel, every faint memory of something embarrassing you said at tea, all of it loops endlessly in your head. You try the usual methods. First, you arrange your nightdress and lie perfectly still, arms crossed gently over your chest like an aspiring corpse. You count backward from 100, no luck. You attempt prayer, then poetry, then the sort of deep breathing that would have the doctor worried if he caught you at it. Your feet are cold, your nose is cold, your anxiety is not. You might try reading, but every magazine and book has been whisked away for overstimulating your mind. No novels allowed after dark, says the doctor. No letters from friends either. Just you. The muffled tick of the mantel clock, and the slow, syrupy dread that you'll be up until dawn. You consider knocking on the wall to see if your husband is awake, but last time he simply suggested you count sheep or think about the empire. Neither helped. Fortunately, there is a solution, and it lives right on your bedside table. The bottle, for gentle repose, is amber glass with a faded label. The instructions are laughably vague. Take as needed, but not too much. You are not supposed to worry about what's inside, though the heavy, earthy scent suggests laudanum, morphine, and possibly a few Victorian secrets that never made it into the etiquette books. A teaspoon, and the world begins to blur around the edges. A tablespoon, and you're not sure whether you're sleeping or simply visiting a dream that's borrowed someone else's wallpaper. As the sedative seeps through your veins, your mind grows lighter. The house could collapse, and you might not notice or care. The anxiety about tomorrow, the appointments, the dresses, the exhausting work of being agreeable, fades for a while. You're not entirely present, but you're not suffering either. Your dreams, when they come, are wild and strange, floating through ballrooms made of clouds, chasing after a dog made entirely of lace, hearing your mother's voice recite recipes backwards. Sometimes you wake with the distinct impression that you just solved all of life's mysteries, only to forget them the instant you blink open your eyes. Of course, the relief is never perfect. Some nights, the sedative merely peels back the first layer of panic, revealing an even deeper layer of restlessness. You toss, you turn, you whisper apologies to the empty darkness for reasons you can't quite name. On especially bad nights, you wonder if you'll ever sleep again, or if your body will simply get up one night and start dusting the drawing room out of habit. But for the most part, you do drift off, eventually. And when you do, it's a sleep both rich and peculiar, a kind of chemical hibernation that leaves you feeling less rested and more marinated. Morning arrives all too soon. The maid draws back the curtains, the world comes rushing in, and you spend the first moments of the day trying to remember which parts of the night were real and which were just another strange, syrup-soaked vision. The cycle repeats. Anxiety at dusk, sedative at midnight, a ghostly sort of slumber, and the hope that one day peace will come without a prescription. Until then, at least you have your little bottle and the comforting illusion that, for a few hours, you can simply let go. Welcome to Victorian sleep. a fragile truce between your nerves, your dreams, and the gentle tyranny of the night. The latest advice column: how to host a tea without screaming. Editors recommend a teaspoon of Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup, especially if you're entertaining children or unwelcome emotions. You open your favorite women's magazine, The Refined Hearth, hoping for inspiration, reassurance, or at least a new recipe that doesn't require soaking a ham for 8 hours in rainwater. The pages are filled with delicate etchings of perfect parlours, glowing testimonials about gooseberry chutney, and endless reminders that your worth is measured by the composure of your afternoon gatherings. Between articles on keeping your marble clean and ferns, nature's tranquilizer, the real currency of Victorian print culture is emotional restraint, preferably achieved with pharmaceuticals. On every page, the subtext is the same: don't let the cracks show. If your hands are shaking as you pour the tea, it's not nerves. It's just an opportunity to mention your new tonic for tranquility. Conveniently advertised on the very next page. Does your spirit feel burdened by the noise of modern life? Asks one ad. Beneath a drawing of a woman, serenely ignoring a small child hanging from the drapes. Try Dr. Bateman's painless drops, now with even more opium. There's a tincture for every trouble, and the editors are generous with their endorsements. It's not just the advertisements. The advice columns themselves are a catalogue of collective anxiety. Mrs. Fairweather of Bath writes in, desperate for help with her nervous stomach and 3 unruly children. The solution? A teaspoon of soothing syrup, and perhaps a brisk walk, alone, if possible, but accompanied by a discreet flask if not. Another reader complains of melancholy after her husband's fishing trip. Have you tried adding a little tincture of valerian to your lemonade? The editor replies, as if a well-timed sedative is the difference between weeping in the garden and being the talk of the next charity bazaar. Beneath all the floral borders and polite phrasing, the truth is hard to miss. Victorian magazines are a lifeline for women who are just barely holding it together, one recipe, one fashion tip, one herbal elixir at a time. How to remove stains from ivory sits right next to how to manage the sorrow of everyday life without disturbing the neighbors. Sometimes you wonder if the real advice is just don't scream, sip, smile, and suppress. The letters to the editor are a masterclass in coded desperation. I find myself overwhelmed by the prospect of another winter in Shropshire, writes Anonymous. And my husband's business has been most vexing. What do you suggest? The response: a recipe for syllabub, a gentle reminder to keep the windows clean, and, tucked between the lines, a clear endorsement for Dr. Simmons' compound elixir of calm. No one ever says the word depressed. Instead, it's fragile, overwrought, or sensitive. The only thing less popular than expressing a negative emotion is expressing it in public without at least a dash of sherry in your cocoa. It's not all bleak, of course. There's camaraderie in these shared struggles. A quiet sisterhood bound by etiquette and ether. You clip out your favorite recipes, scribble notes about the best new patent medicines, and exchange remedies with friends at tea, each of you pretending not to notice the collective exhaustion. Have you tried the new opium lozenges? Only before bed. I find them more restful than the syrup. Oh, but be careful. They made poor Mrs. Abernathy see double for a week. The laughter is genuine, if slightly hysterical. In the end, women's magazines are less about transformation and more about survival. They're guidebooks for performing grace under pressure, with a healthy dose of denial, powdered sugar, and whatever was in that last spoonful of syrup. The pharmacy of despair isn't just a shelf in your cupboard. It's the unspoken backbone of every household, the secret ingredient in every social success. So you dog-ear a recipe for orange sponge cake, mark a column about keeping calm in the face of relatives, and tuck away another ad for gentle repose. As the tea simmers and the children howl, you realize you're not alone. Every woman reading this magazine is doing the same thing, fighting the chaos with a teaspoon, a smile, and just a little help from the pharmacy of despair. Self-care, Victorian style. Enjoy a mineral bath laced with arsenic, or perhaps a facial cream made with mercury. If it doesn't make you beautiful, at least you won't remember what you were worried about. Spa day in the Victorian era isn't about cucumber water, relaxing music, or eucalyptus-scented towels. It's a full-contact sport, waged with chemistry sets disguised as beauty routines. You set aside an afternoon to restore your constitution, which really means volunteering your body as a test site for every substance the local chemist can legally or questionably sell. Your friends say you look tired. Your mother-in-law says you look robust. The ultimate insult. Clearly, it's time to risk a little recreational poisoning. The day begins with a soak in the bath. But not just any bath. This one is enriched with arsenic, the hottest new spa trend straight from Paris. Advertisements claim it will whiten your skin, erase freckles, and possibly banish unsavory thoughts. The water tingles in a way that makes you question your life choices, but you're determined to achieve that ethereal pallor, even if it means glowing in the dark by next week. Your maid stands by with a pumice stone and a pamphlet about the invigorating power of radium. You're not sure what radium is, but you're pretty sure your descendants will regret it. After your dip, it's time for complexion cream, an elegant blend of mercury, ammonia, and hope. You apply it to your face with careful upward strokes, as the magazine recommends. It promises to dissolve imperfections and restore youthful dewiness. Though, after a few weeks, the only thing dewy is the perpetual sweat brought on by mild systemic poisoning. If you accidentally get some in your mouth, you tell yourself it's probably just as effective that way. You hear rumors of women who have to stop using their creams because their teeth start falling out. But you're not there yet. That's for next season. The treatment doesn't stop at your face. For volumizing hair, there's a lovely pomade containing bear grease and quicklime. It's rumored to grow thick, glossy hair, though it mostly grows anxiety about open flames. Some daring souls try lotions with asbestos, praised for their soothing and insulating properties. If you feel your cheeks tingle and your scalp buzz, that's either the recipe working or a gentle warning from your nervous system to reconsider your life plan. If you have a little spending money, you might splurge on a trip to the spa for a galvanic facial, which involves strapping a brass contraption to your head and letting the attendant run a mild electric current through your skin. The procedure is said to tighten pores and invigorate the soul, though mostly it just leaves you smelling faintly of ozone and regret. For the truly adventurous, there are thermal mud wraps, mineral salt scrubs, and mustard poultices guaranteed to either cure your gout or make you too numb to care. Throughout the day, your fellow spa-goers whisper beauty secrets as they sip rejuvenating mineral water, heavily laced with iron, magnesium, and the unmistakable flavor of rusty pipes. The conversation inevitably turns to who's using what. Have you tried the new prussic acid serum? It's divine for wrinkles. My cousin's eyelashes fell out, but she's so pale now, like a duchess. There's a strange camaraderie in this group pursuit of near mummification. You leave the spa glowing, whether from good health or low-level toxicity is anyone's guess. Your skin is suspiciously smooth, your hair oddly stiff, and you're high on the knowledge that you've survived another round of Victorian self-care. You'll sleep soundly tonight, partially because you can't feel your face, and partially because arsenic has a calming effect on the nerves. When you look in the mirror, you see a vision of ideal beauty. Pale, delicate, possibly radioactive, and blissfully unconcerned about tomorrow. In the end, Victorian Spa Day is less about health and more about ritual, a way to assert control over your body and your anxieties in a world that gives you little power over either. The beauty may not last, but the memories, fuzzy, tingly, and ever so slightly toxic, are yours forever. There's an opium tincture for every ailment: cough, menstrual cramps, existential despair, and that nagging feeling that you're being haunted by the ghost of your own unfulfilled potential. Step into any Victorian drawing room, and you'll spot the bottles, perched quietly on mantels, hidden behind lace curtains, or proudly displayed in the medicine chest as a symbol of refined suffering. Opium is the Swiss Army knife of the 19th century household. Not sure what's wrong? Try a few drops. Feeling nervous, achy, or vaguely poetic? Try a few more. There is no problem that cannot be gently nudged aside, at least for a little while, by a splash of this amber elixir. The day begins, as most days do, with a headache and a hint of dread. Perhaps the baby is teething, or your mother-in-law is coming for a visit. Maybe the post brought a particularly cryptic bill. No matter. Out comes the laudanum, a measured spoonful in your tea, and suddenly the walls soften, the screaming quiets, and you can almost convince yourself that the letter from the bank is just an elaborate love note. Even the relentless ticking of the clock seems to fade into the distance. The magic of opium isn't just in its pain-killing power. It's the emotional insulation. Heartbreak? Loss? An argument over which side of the toast is the proper one for jam? No need to confront your feelings when you can just press them down, deep below the surface, with another dose. Victorian etiquette frowns on public displays of emotion, but nobody minds if you're a little dreamy around the edges. In fact, if you're especially poetic after your tincture, you may find yourself the center of attention at the next salon. Assuming you can stay awake through the conversation. Medical advice, such as it is, practically recommends opium for anything short of actual decapitation. The family doctor will cheerfully hand you a bottle for nerves, female complaints, tummy upset, or the heavy burden of consciousness. It's not just for adults. Babies, fretful from colic or teething, are dosed with Godfrey's cordial or Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup, both potent blends of opium and sugar. Grandmother takes her poppy drops after supper, and the cook might have a nip to steady her hands before attempting the Sunday roast. Of course, there are consequences. The world, when viewed through a fog of opium, becomes softer but also slippery. You misplace your keys, your hat, your entire train of thought. Chores stretch out for hours. You might find yourself sitting in the parlor, staring contentedly at the wallpaper, convinced you see shapes in the floral pattern, faces, birds, the occasional judgmental relative. Every now and then, you remember what you were doing and start all over again. Socially, opium is the great equalizer. The grandest lady and the humblest scullery maid might both rely on a secret nip to get through the day. At tea, you swap tips about the strongest formulas and the friendliest apothecaries. Dr. Smythe's drops are divine, whispers one friend. Try Miss Pemberley's cordial, guaranteed to make the vicar's sermon bearable, advises another. There is a subtle solidarity in your shared chemical escapism. Still, the line between gentle relief and gentle disappearance is thin. If you're not careful, you may lose whole afternoons, or, on particularly gloomy days, entire weekends. The world outside your window keeps turning. Children grow, seasons change, and you drift through it all with the calm detachment of someone who's just not entirely here. Sometimes you wonder if you're living or simply haunting your own life. Another Victorian ghost lost between the cabinets and the settee. At the end of the day, opium is the answer for everything. But it doesn't solve anything. It hushes the aches and anxieties, floats you above your troubles, and leaves your real problems, like your sense of self, quietly simmering beneath the surface. In the Victorian pharmacy, every bottle is labeled relief, but the fine print always reads, side effects may include time travel, emotional numbness, and the gradual vanishing of your ambitions. So you take your dose, smooth your skirts, and face the next small disaster with a pleasantly empty mind, knowing that in this world, at least, The answer is always just a tincture away. Time to give birth. Don't worry, the doctor's got chloroform, ether, and a prayer. You may not remember the experience, but you'll definitely have a story for the next séance. It's the middle of the night, and the house is already a flurry of anxious whispers and clattering footsteps. Someone has dispatched a boy for the doctor, the midwife has been roused from her bed, and your mother-in-law is in the hallway, loudly praying to whichever saint handles emergencies involving wallpaper and the family name. You, the main event, are propped up with pillows, gripping the bedposts and trying to remember your breathing exercises, which, in Victorian England, consist mainly of don't scream too loudly and try not to faint before the doctor arrives. The room is dim, warm, and heavy with the scent of lavender water, candle wax, and barely suppressed panic. If you're lucky, the doctor will arrive before things get too dramatic, bearing his black bag full of mysterious implements and, most importantly, his chloroform. Just a sniff, he promises, as he waves a cloth beneath your nose. It'll all be over soon. You inhale, the room tilts sideways, and suddenly the pain is distant, muffled by clouds. The women around you fade into soft-edged shapes. Someone pats your hand. Someone else murmurs encouragement. For a moment, you might be drifting through the afterlife, or at least the better part of a séance. Chloroform, the wonder drug of its day, is equal parts blessing and gamble. It doesn't always work, and sometimes it works too well. You might wake to a healthy baby, or to an anxious gathering of family and medical staff, all grateful you survived. Either way, your recollection of the whole affair will be patchy at best. Some women come to claiming they saw angels, others recall nothing at all. A lucky few get to forget the more gruesome details, remembering only the relief of it being finished, while the menfolk pace downstairs, complaining about the cost of the doctor and the nerve-wracking uncertainty of waiting. You and the midwife are engaged in a feat of endurance that has not improved much since the dawn of time. The difference is the promise of a few moments' unconsciousness, if you can stay awake long enough to ask for it. Ether is an option if chloroform isn't handy, though it tends to make the room smell like a chemistry experiment gone awry and may leave you rambling in 3 languages you don't actually speak. After what feels like a lifetime, and maybe it is, in a way, a wail announces that the baby has finally arrived. Cheers erupt, tears flow, and everyone immediately forgets the pain, the fear, and the lingering smell of antiseptic and burnt hair. The doctor assures everyone that mother and child are doing as well as can be expected, which in Victorian terms means not actively dying. You're congratulated, washed up, and handed a cup of weak tea as if that's all it takes to knit your body back together. Of course, childbirth in this era is still a dangerous business. Complications abound, and not every birth is a joyous occasion. Infection lurks in the shadows, as does the ever-present risk of bleeding, fever, or a doctor who's been a little too generous with his miracle compounds. You may be sent straight from the birthing bed to weeks of rest cure, which is just code for lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, and hoping the baby sleeps as much as you do. But for a brief, delirious interval, you're a hero. You've crossed through fire and fog, survived a journey powered by medicine, luck, and the collective prayers of every woman in your family. You will have a story to tell when you're allowed to speak, of course. Perhaps you'll exaggerate the details. Perhaps you'll leave them out entirely. Either way, you'll join the ranks of Victorian women who know that when it comes to childbirth, a little forgetfulness is the best medicine of all. So rest easy, as much as you can. Your body has done the impossible. With a little help from modern science, Victorian superstition, and just enough chloroform to float you halfway to the next world and back again. Welcome to motherhood, Victorian style, part miracle, part memory loss, and entirely unforgettable, even if you can't remember most of it. Lost a loved one? It's time for a respectable bout of mourning, enhanced by generous doses of laudanum. crying quietly in black crepe, you ponder whether the afterlife includes prescription refills. In Victorian England, grief isn't just an emotion, it's an event, a social performance, and, if you're especially unlucky, an endurance test that can last longer than most careers. The rules are simple but strict. You wear black, you lower your voice, and you ensure your tears are appropriately dignified. Even your accessories are in mourning: jet beads, black veils, and a handkerchief soaked in both tears and tincture. There's a dress code for every phase of loss. Full mourning, half mourning, and eventually, we promise you can wear lilac again someday morning. And if your spirit falters, that's what the laudanum is for. The house transforms overnight. Heavy black drapes go up in every window. Mirrors are shrouded, clocks are stopped, and all the cheerful chintz vanishes beneath swathes of dark fabric. Even the family dog looks subdued, possibly because someone tied a black ribbon around its neck. Your friends arrive bearing casseroles, whispered condolences, and if they're truly kind, a discreet bottle of something to steady your nerves. Your days are measured in rituals. There's the business of notifying every distant cousin and family acquaintance by letter. A process made easier if you predose with laudanum before trying to spell sympathies correctly on the 50th envelope. Meals are sparse. Appetites vanish in the face of sorrow and thick, starchy comfort food. Tea is offered around the clock, but the cups often contain more than just Earl Grey. A teaspoon of laudanum in your cup helps transform raw heartbreak into manageable melancholy. If you're truly at a loss, a second dose before bed will smooth out the rough edges of grief, at least until morning. Victorian mourning is a group activity, but everyone is performing their own private, chemical-laced drama. The widow weeps quietly behind her veil, her face pale from both loss and a persistent case of arsenic powder. The children whisper in corners, uncertain whether to be sad or just bored. The menfolk are allowed a few manly tears, then retreat to the study for brandy and, perhaps, a medicinal drop or two themselves. Meanwhile, you drift through the house like a ghost, wondering if you'll ever feel real again or if you're already halfway to the other side. There's a curious competition among mourners. Who can look the most devastated? Who has the darkest crepe, the heaviest sigh, the best tragic silhouette against a rain-streaked window? Social standing depends on it. If you stop wearing black too soon, or if you're caught smiling at a joke, the neighbors will talk. If you mourn too long, they'll talk even more. Laudanum helps blur the edges of etiquette, making it easier to cry when you must, and to forget yourself when you can't. Of course, real grief is messy, unpredictable, and resists schedules and fashion advice. Sometimes the sadness swells at midnight, or during the third verse of a hymn, or when you find your loved one's glove in a drawer. Victorian society offers little comfort beyond routine, appearances, and the blessed numbness that comes from your pharmacist. It's all a performance, but underneath the layers of ritual and black silk, the pain is real. As the weeks wear on, the world begins to creep back in. You trade in your heavy crepe for softer fabrics, swap out your laudanum for weak tea, and learn to smile again, carefully, cautiously, in case anyone is watching. The memory of your loss lingers, softened by time, tradition, and a haze of medicinal forgetfulness. In the end, mourning becomes part of you, woven into your life along with the velvet and lace, a quiet testament to love, loss, and the lengths you'll go to endure. And as you finally step outside, pale and dignified, into the bright shock of a new season, you can't help but wonder, if the afterlife does include prescription refills, it might just be the most comforting idea the Victorians ever invented. Pen in hand, mind in the clouds, you write letters that start as invitations and end as abstract poetry. Who knows what you promised your aunt? At least your handwriting is beautiful. In Victorian England, letter writing is both an art form and a survival skill. The mail coach is the era's version of instant messaging, if instant means in 3 to 5 business days, and possibly intercepted by a nosy footman. The ritual begins with the setting: a tidy desk, the good stationery, a bottle of ink, and, crucially, a generous spoonful of soothing tonic swirling gently in your teacup. The effect? Your thoughts wander, your words soften, and everything you write takes on a gentle, dreamlike shimmer. The task seems simple at first. A thank you note to your cousin for her lovely visit, an RSVP to Mrs. Ellingsworth's afternoon tea, a line or two to your mother, assuring her you're still alive and only moderately scandalous. But the longer you sit, the more the edges of the page blur, and the more likely you are to lose the plot entirely. Invitations transform into philosophical musings. Grocery lists slip into iambic pentameter. Somewhere along the way, you accidentally invent a new form of punctuation. You tell yourself you're being poetic. Maybe you are. Victorian society prizes flowery prose, and nothing encourages a meandering sentence quite like a gentle haze of opiates or laudanum. Your pen traces elegant loops and swirls, each letter a tiny work of art. Even as your brain is floating 2 feet above your body, you pause to admire your penmanship, a skill drilled into you since girlhood, and smile at the way your signature curls like a cat's tail. Somewhere between your second and third letter, the world around you starts to feel pleasantly distant. You can't remember if you're replying to Lady Ashton or Lady Ashcroft. So you simply address both and hope they never compare notes. You send your brother a riddle, your childhood friend a recipe, and your distant aunt a meditation on the weather, all in the same inky breath. If you accidentally promise to visit someone in Cornwall or invest in a cousin's pineapple plantation, well, that's tomorrow's problem. Of course, letter writing under the influence comes with risks. You may wax poetic about a neighbor's roses, and then forget whether they're real or imaginary. You may pour your heart out to a friend, then panic when you can't recall the details the next day. There's always the danger of sending a love note to the vicar, or including a list of household grievances in your thank you card. Victorian etiquette books do not cover what to do when you accidentally propose marriage to the milkman in a postscript. Still, there's a certain magic to these foggy communications. Your friends and family begin to treasure your letters for their unpredictability. Some read them aloud for entertainment. Others save them for rainy days, puzzling over the cryptic references and unexpected doodles in the margins. Your aunt writes back, quoting your own poetry with great seriousness, and you nod sagely, having no memory of writing it. Every now and then, you pen a line so perfectly, heartbreakingly true that you wonder if perhaps this is the real gift of your era's pharmaceuticals. The honesty slips through, disguised as whimsy. I miss you all the time. Even when I don't know what day it is, you write, or the world is softer when I remember you. These lines linger in the mind, longer than the tonic ever could. When you finally tie up your bundle of letters with a faded blue ribbon and hand them off to the waiting servant, you feel a peculiar sense of accomplishment. The world is slightly blurrier, the boundaries between sense and nonsense more flexible, but you have communicated. You have sent your thoughts out into the world, riding the waves of ink and inspiration, hoping they find their mark, and maybe, just maybe, that they are understood. In Victorian England, letter writing isn't just correspondence, it's therapy, confession, and a kind of quiet rebellion. And if the odd abstract poem or accidental promise slips through, well, at least your handwriting was beautiful. You find yourself wandering the halls at midnight, unsure whether you're awake, asleep, or just very, very well medicated. The dog doesn't judge. He's been licking the arsenic wallpaper again. Night in a Victorian house is a different world. The day's commotion fades to silence, broken only by the soft tick of the grandfather clock and the occasional thump from the settling beams. Shadows stretch long across the carpets. Every candle flickers like a nervous thought. Sleep is elusive, so you rise, slowly, in your nightdress and slippers, hair a tangled crown, and begin your moonlit patrol. At first, you tell yourself you're just checking the windows, making sure the doors are latched. But it's really a restless energy, the kind that builds up after one too many calming spoonfuls of tonic and not enough actual rest. Your body drifts on the ghostly edge between sedation and insomnia. You move with quiet purpose, if not actual intent, through corridors lined with family portraits and lurking sideboards. Everything looks a little strange in the gaslight's glow. Your father-in-law's painting seems to be watching, and that brass umbrella stand definitely wasn't there yesterday. You pass the nursery and pause. The baby's soft breathing rises and falls, a tiny anchor to reality. You linger by the door, listening for a moment, then carry on, each step muffled by thick Persian rugs and the even thicker fog of your mind. Sometimes you hum to yourself, old songs with half-remembered lyrics. Other nights you talk softly to the houseplants. No one ever replies, which is just as well. As you drift from room to room, you notice details you missed during the day. The chipped edge of a marble hearth, the tiny spider living behind the banister, the way your slippers leave patterns in the dust that will mystify the staff in the morning. If you're feeling philosophical, you might compose a poem or two in your head. Lines that dissolve the moment you turn a corner. You imagine yourself as the house's resident ghost, pale, wistful, and just a little out of place. If you're lucky, you'll encounter the dog, padding along in the shadows, tail wagging in a secret nighttime code. He's your silent companion, unbothered by your mutterings or sudden pauses to inspect the pattern on the wallpaper. He's probably searching for dropped crumbs or, more likely, another taste of that toxic wallpaper, which explains his frequent, soulful sighs and suspiciously green tongue. On some nights, you find yourself in the kitchen, staring at the bread bin as if it contains the secrets of the universe. Maybe you pour yourself a little more soothing cordial to help you sleep, or maybe you just stare out the scullery window at the moonlit garden, wondering what's awake out there. Foxes, perhaps. Nightingales. Or just the restless ghosts of other Victorian women circling their own houses, lost in their own midnight wanderings. Eventually, you circle back to the drawing room, where the embers glow faintly and the furniture looms like forgotten dreams. You sink into a chair, fingers tracing the embroidery on the armrest. For a while, you simply sit, eyes half closed, letting your thoughts drift wherever the laudanum leads them. You recall snatches of conversation, old disappointments, the face of someone you loved long ago. Melancholy is thicker at night, but so is the strange peace that comes with surrendering to it. At last, fatigue settles in for real. You shuffle back toward your bedroom, mind foggy, feet cold. You slip into bed, pulling the covers up to your chin. Tomorrow the house will wake again. Bells will ring, voices will rise, breakfast will be served, and you'll become visible to the living once more. For now, you curl up, haunted and haunting, drifting into a sleep as tangled as your nightdress. In Victorian England, the night walk is both rebellion and ritual, a quiet, dreamlike way to claim a little space for yourself in a world that expects you to be silent, serene, and asleep. Tonight, the halls belong to you and the dog, and whatever dreams manage to find you in the dark. Public meltdowns, when nerves snap in the parlor. Sometimes, the drugs don't work and the facade cracks. You burst into tears at a tea party, but it's okay. Everyone else is also quietly unraveling. The parlor, with its velvet drapes and embroidered cushions, is supposed to be a sanctuary of civility, a place for polite laughter and wafer-thin sandwiches, where problems are tucked discreetly beneath silver trays. But on some days, perhaps it's the humidity, the fifth cup of lukewarm tea, or simply the last straw in a week of disappointment. The nerves rebel. Your hand trembles, your lip quivers, and suddenly you're dabbing furiously at your eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, hoping no one notices except everyone already has. Victorian etiquette offers 1,000 ways to conceal distress, but precious few to express it. You're supposed to murmur, just a touch of the vapors, and excuse yourself with a smile. But sometimes the carefully crafted exterior splinters. Maybe it's the memory of an old grief, a stray comment from Lady Dunwoody about your housekeeping, or the fact that your petticoat feels like it's made from burlap and bad decisions. One moment you're nodding along to talk of church flower arrangements, and the next, your tears are flowing, your breath is hitching, and every eye in the room is politely, uncomfortably on you. Of course, you're not alone. If you glance up, you'll catch a glimpse of fellow guests clenching their jaw, blinking away their own storms. The hostess shoots you a sympathetic look. Her third meltdown this season was only last Tuesday, after all. The other ladies quickly look away, embarrassed not by your feelings but by their own perilous proximity to the same precipice. The parlor is a powder keg, and every woman is quietly clutching her own match. The best-case scenario. Someone hustles you off to the retiring room, pressing a cold compress and a dose of nervine tonic into your hands. "Rest here, dear," they whisper. "The others will carry on without you." You compose yourself among the fainting couches and potted ferns, breathing in the scent of lavender water and friendly denial. There's a bottle of laudanum on the side table, just in case, and a copy of The Refined Hearth, already open to an article on restoring calm with chamomile and discretion. The worst-case scenario? The hostess can't quite cover the awkwardness, and someone changes the subject too loudly. "What lovely weather we're having, considering the rain," while the guests studiously ignore your existence, save for a stray glance that says, "Don't worry, I've been there too." In Victorian society, the public meltdown is both scandal and solidarity. Nobody will mention it again unless it's to reassure you later in a letter scented with violets that we're all so very delicate these days. Behind the scenes, the truth is universal. The pressure is relentless, the expectations unyielding, and the nerves, however laudanum-laced, are only human. Sometimes, the daily performances of perfection are just too much. The medicines smooth out the sharpest edges, but nothing can fully mute the low, constant hum of worry, regret, or longing. If you have a meltdown, it's almost a rite of passage, proof that you are, in fact, alive beneath the corsetry and chemical haze. You recover, of course. You always do. You dry your eyes, repair your powder, and re-enter the parlor as if nothing happened. Conversation resumes, sandwiches circulate, and you slip back into the gentle rhythm of Victorian social life. Later, someone will squeeze your hand or share a conspiratorial smile. You're not the first, and you won't be the last. In the end, a public meltdown in the parlor is less an embarrassment and more an act of gentle rebellion, a brief, vulnerable reminder that the facade is just that. It's a secret code among women who spend their lives balancing on the knife edge of expectation. Tomorrow, you'll share a knowing glance with your fellow guests, and perhaps a little extra laudanum in your tea. Because sometimes, the most courageous thing you can do is to unravel, just for a moment, where everyone can see and know you'll be pieced back together with kindness, empathy, and maybe a new recipe for calming cordial. If things get really bad, there's always the sanatorium. All-inclusive, round. The clock care, daily walks, and the occasional ice bath to remind you you're still alive. The mere mention of the sanatorium carries a bittersweet weight, a mix of dread and relief. It's the Victorian woman's last resort, an escape hatch from the relentless expectations and social suffocation at home. You tell your friends you're taking a rest at the seaside or recovering in the country for your nerves, but everyone knows what it really means. You've reached your limit, and now you're officially allowed to unravel under professional supervision. The journey begins with a note from your doctor, written in an elegant, spidery hand. My patient requires restorative treatment away from the stresses of household management and society. Translation: she needs a break before she throws the piano out the window, or dyes her morning dress neon yellow just for the thrill. Soon, a carriage arrives, and you are whisked away, clutching a small suitcase, your favorite shawl, and a bottle of something medicinal just in case the nerves flare up en route. The sanatorium itself is part hospital, part spa, part genteel prison. Set on sprawling grounds, it boasts wide verandas, shady gardens, and strict rules about rest and quiet. The staff glide around in starched white aprons, whispering about patients with the detached efficiency of people who have seen it all. Your room is small, neat, and painted a calming pastel, with just enough personality to feel temporary. The windows open to the scent of damp grass and distant sea. Though you're discouraged from spending too much time staring into the horizon, rumination is bad for the soul. Your new daily routine is built around structure, meals on time, bed promptly at dusk, and gentle exercise approved by the head nurse. Mornings begin with invigorating walks along the gravel paths, where you nod politely to the other residents, all of whom seem slightly translucent and forever wrapped in shawls. There are lectures on moral improvement, embroidery circles, and, for the especially troubled, a visit from the kindly, distant sanatorium physician. He checks your pulse, inquires about your dreams, and prescribes a new concoction, perhaps a bit less laudanum, a bit more valerian, or a bracing tonic of bitters and brandy. The highlight of the week might be the famous ice bath, an experience you only endure because the alternatives, hot mustard plasters, electrified water, restraint jackets, sound even less appealing. The nurse, armed with a bucket and a look of grim determination, dunks you in icy water to rouse the nerves and restore equilibrium. You come out gasping, cheeks pink, heart hammering. For a few minutes, you do feel gloriously, painfully alive. Some patients thrive under this regime, writing long letters home about the beauty of the gardens and the calm of the routine. Others spend hours in the library, leafing through old magazines and avoiding eye contact. There's a camaraderie in shared suffering. Subtle glances in the hallway, whispered conversations about which doctor prescribes the best sedative, the latest rumor about the woman in room 14 who once tried to escape by hiding in the laundry cart. Still, there is comfort here. For the first time in ages, no one expects you to host a dinner, correct the servants, or smile through a migraine. You can collapse, cry, and even complain, all under the watchful eye of someone paid not to judge you. There's always a faint hope that you'll return home restored, lighter, calmer, less likely to dissolve in the parlor or write alarming poetry in your letters. After weeks or months, time blurs here, softened by routine and sedation. You are declared much improved. You're sent home with a small bottle of your favorite tonic, a handful of cautionary pamphlets, and the polite advice to rest as much as possible. You rejoin your family, slightly paler, perhaps a little wiser, and certainly better at hiding your medicine in the tea caddy. The sanatorium wasn't exactly a cure, but it was a pause, a gentle intermission in the endless performance of Victorian womanhood. And as you resume your daily life, you carry with you the memory of long walks, shared secrets, and that bracing, unforgettable ice bath, a reminder that even in an age of decorum, sometimes a little shock to the system is the only way to feel real again. Numbness, confusion, random acts of poetry, and a lingering suspicion that the neighbor's cat is plotting against you. Side effects may include not remembering your own name, but at least you're calm about it. The advertisements and doctors always highlight the good news. Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup, perfect for children, ladies, and the chronically anxious. Bayer's heroin syrup, for headaches, heartbreaks, and general malaise. You are promised relief, tranquility, and a glowing sense of well-being. But what no one mentions in those cheery magazine pages is the after-party that comes with all that medicinal merriment. It begins subtly enough. You forget where you left your hairpins, then your handkerchief, and then, one memorably foggy Tuesday, your own birthday. Faces become soft-edged, names float in and out of memory, and the everyday becomes a gently confusing blur. Did you write that letter to Aunt Gwendolen, or just dream about it? Did you actually put on 2 left shoes? Or is your foot simply numb again? The border between dream and waking shrinks with every dose, until you start keeping a little diary just to track which hours of the day actually happened. It's not just memory that gets slippery. Emotions come and go like uninvited guests. You may find yourself weeping over the tragic life of the house fern, or, conversely, serenely unmoved by the news that your husband has misplaced the family fortune again. Anxiety doesn't vanish. It just trades places with a gentle, floating detachment, a sense that everything is happening to someone else. Your anger is a faint echo. Your joy is a pleasant hum. The only thing truly vibrant is the occasional bolt of panic when you realize you've put the sugar bowl in the linen cupboard and the dog's now barking at the wallpaper again. And then there's the creativity. Nobody warned you that laudanum and company are a recipe for random acts of poetry. You scrawl couplets on shopping lists and compose dramatic sonnets to the tea kettle. Sometimes, in the haze before sleep, you're struck by what must be a world-changing idea, only to discover, in the morning, it's just a recipe for cold mutton. Your friends receive rambling letters filled with wild metaphors and the occasional line in Latin, though you haven't studied Latin since you fainted in Miss Appleby's class at 12. It's a small consolation that, as you lose your grip on details, your grip on rhyme and meter seems to improve. There are other side effects, of course. The world can take on an odd tilt, with familiar faces suddenly looking uncanny, or a sense that the furniture is conspiring behind your back. Sometimes you're certain the neighbor's cat is watching you from the hedge, blinking slowly in a code only felines, and those in a medicinal haze can decipher. Your appetite waxes and wanes, and you develop a mysterious preference for eating jam with a fork. Ordinary activities become miniature adventures. Climbing stairs, holding a conversation, not accidentally drinking the flower water. But the worst, and, ironically, the most soothing side effect is the numbness, a creeping, pleasant anesthesia that smooths out all the sharp corners until your days float past in a soft, pale blur. This is the real ghost story, not the haunted houses or whispered secrets, but the gentle fading of yourself behind a curtain of chemistry and habit. Life becomes manageable, yes, but also muffled. You stop worrying, but you also stop caring about the dust on the mantel, the argument at tea, or even whether your own name appears on the calling card you hand the vicar. No one talks about these side effects, at least not above a whisper. They're just another secret, shared in knowing glances and half-finished sentences. A little absent-mindedness, my dear, perfectly normal. We're all a bit dreamy these days. So you keep dosing, keep drifting, and keep writing odes to the jam spoon, grateful that, at the very least, you're calm about it all. In the end, Victorian tranquility is a quiet erasure, a gentle, almost elegant disappearance, in which the world remains just sharp enough to navigate and just blurry enough to survive. If you ever remember this phase of your life, it will be with a fondness for the fuzziness and the secret suspicion that maybe, just maybe, the cat really was plotting after all. Morning again, you're still here. You pour your tonic, tighten your corset, and step into another day of polite conversation and quiet survival. You may be halfway a ghost, but you're not alone. Every other woman on the block is floating with you. The day starts in that peculiar Victorian limbo, somewhere between waking and sleep, your mind still wrapped in the soft haze of last night's sedatives. You blink at the ceiling, take stock of your limbs, and listen for the gentle sounds of the house coming to life. The clatter of the maid in the kitchen, the echoing footfalls of the milkman, the distant cries of the first child to spill jam on a freshly laundered pinafore. With a sigh, you roll over. Reach for the blue bottle on your bedside table, and pour out your carefully measured morning dose. Enough to take the edge off, not quite enough to send you drifting back into oblivion. There's a strange courage in this ritual, a quiet resolve to keep moving, even when your body and mind would much rather fade into the wallpaper. The world expects composure, poise, and productivity, and you deliver in your own gently sedated way. You pull on layers of underthings, your corset squeezing you back into the realm of the living, and wrap yourself in a dress that's both armor and disguise. By the time you reach the breakfast table, you've already fought half the day's battles against pain, anxiety, and the weight of another round of endless, ladylike endurance. The morning slips by in a series of soft, blurry moments. You pour tea, smile at your husband's newspaper, and manage a conversation about the weather without saying anything you'll regret. Your mind floats in and out of focus, only partly anchored to the present. You plan the day's meals, half listen to the cook's questions, and make a mental note to check on the laundry, though whether you'll remember it is another matter. Outside the window, the world carries on. Carriages rattle by, dogs bark, and somewhere, a neighbor is already ringing for the doctor. What you don't say, what you can't say, is that you're exhausted in a way that sleep alone can't cure. The medicines help, but they also keep you hovering just above the surface, never fully engaged, never fully at rest. Every other woman you know is doing the same, surviving, floating, getting by. You see it in their eyes, the half smile at the market, the distracted way they drift through church, the nervous laughter over tea. It's a collective secret, a silent solidarity. If you're halfway a ghost, at least you're in good company. The day unfolds in careful increments: errands, household chores, a round of polite calls, 1,000 small performances that keep the wheels of Victorian society turning. You take comfort in the routine, even as it grinds you down. If the pressure builds, if your nerves jangle or your heart aches, you slip away to the drawing room for a measured sip of tonic and a few deep breaths. You know the drill. You've practiced the art of survival so long it's muscle memory. Sometimes, you catch yourself longing for something sharper, more real, a flash of laughter, an unscripted moment of joy. You might find it in the garden, in the unexpected warmth of the sun on your face, or in a stolen smile from the maid who knows exactly how much nervous tonic you're really taking. You treasure these small mercies, letting them anchor you to the world for a moment before you resume your gentle drift. Evening arrives, and with it, the blessed relief of routine winding down. Dinner is a blur, conversation gentle, and soon you're in your room again, unwinding the day's efforts with another measured dose. As you settle into bed, you wonder if tomorrow will be different. But the real victory is that you made it through. One more day survived. One more quiet act of resilience. You're still here. You keep drifting. And even if you're halfway a ghost, you're still part of the strange, stubborn sisterhood that floats through Victorian life. Together, apart, and always surviving. You open your medicine cabinet. Well, cabinet is a strong word. It's really a wobbly shelf, and gaze upon a dazzling array of bottles, powders, and dubious syrups. There's something for every occasion. Indigestion, nerves, a case of the Mondays. If it's not opium-based, it's probably mercury. The only thing scarier than your ailments is the fact that you're dosing yourself by eyeballing it. The Victorian home pharmacy is less a medical resource and more a rogues gallery of the era's most dubious inventions. No household is complete without at least a dozen mysterious remedies, each promising to banish everything from gout to existential crisis with a single spoonful. There's a bottle for every malady and mood, and most of them could double as industrial solvents. The labels, printed in fancy script, offer wild assurances: restores vigor, promotes lady, like calm, or the ever popular good for what ails you, which is comforting until you realize what's inside. You study your collection. Laudanum for the nerves, morphine drops for those unmanageable headaches, arsenic wafers for the complexion, and a big, handsome jar of mercury ointment for skin complaints or, if you're feeling particularly reckless, as a tooth powder. Next to these are patent pills of mysterious origin, vegetable tonics, which suspiciously smell like gin, and a tin of cocaine-laced lozenges for mental fatigue. The only thing missing is a bottle of holy water, just in case. Dosing is an adventure. The corks don't always fit, and the spoons never match, so you pour, sprinkle, or dab with a practiced guess. There's no child-proofing, just a faint hope that the children can't reach the top shelf, and a vague warning to the maid, only the blue bottle, never the green. Your doctor's instructions, written in a hand that resembles an ink blot with a grudge, aren't much help. Take as needed, he scribbled. Not too much. Or too little. If you measure out a little extra, who's to know? Of course, the effectiveness of these remedies is variable. Laudanum guarantees a gentle drift into nothingness, which is at least a reprieve from the relentless drone of household complaints. Morphine stops your headache, and every other sensation for that matter. The arsenic wafers leave your cheeks fashionably pale, though you try not to think about what they're doing to your insides. The invigorating bitters taste like regret and turpentine, but at least you feel something. Even the humble cough syrup, laced with opiates and a healthy dose of brandy, promises to make you forget you were ever sick at all. And then there's the fun of mixing and matching, a little laudanum with your tea, a dash of syrup before guests arrive, and, if you're feeling especially daring, a lady's cordial before bed. Translation: pure alcohol with a medicinal excuse. You become your own apothecary, adjusting your daily blend according to mood, weather, and the general willingness to face another hour of Victorian life. The real risk isn't the medicine itself, but the fog it leaves behind. A kind of semi-functional dream where you can't quite remember if you paid the butcher or just imagined it. Social calls become an opportunity for chemical exchange. Neighbors swap bottles and recipes at tea. Try this elixir, it's done wonders for my nerves. This powder will keep the children quiet for hours. It's a low-key community pharmacy, operated by amateurs and fueled by desperation. Everyone has a story about an aunt who took too much blue potion and saw angels, or a cousin who tried to cure insomnia and ended up napping for 3 days straight. Of course, you can't escape the sense of danger. Some bottles are so potent they practically glow in the dark. You store the most suspicious remedies out of sight, praying no one ever confuses the cholera drops with the cough syrup. The family doctor, when he visits, raises an eyebrow at your collection, but simply adds another bottle to the shelf and pockets his fee. At the end of the day, your home pharmacy is a testament to both ingenuity and sheer survival instinct. Every bottle tells a story of pain soothed, of afternoons survived, of a world just slightly too much for sober living. You lock the cabinet, or at least shut it tightly, pour yourself a cautious dose, and face the evening with the kind of calm that only comes from knowing you have a little something for whatever might come next. Your housemaid, Mary, has her own stash of patent medicines. For her lumbago, she says. But you both know it's because you keep borrowing hers. In the kitchen, the staff gossip about the best places to buy Mrs. Allen's pink pills and whether the footman has been nipping at the family's brandy-laced cough syrup. Upstairs, everyone pretends not to notice. Below stairs, the true spirit of Victorian survival bubbles and brews, not just in the big copper pots, but in secret jars and coded whispers. Mary, the maid who has seen more dust than daylight, tucks her tonics into a chipped teacup at the back of the pantry. You suspect she's a minor genius of self-medication, always ready with a remedy for nerves, chills, or the after-effects of spending 8 hours polishing someone else's silver. If you're desperate enough, you'll slip down in the night and trade a borrowed hairpin or a ration of jam for a sip of her soothing mixture. It's an unspoken agreement. Everyone needs a little help to get through these endless, exhausting days. The kitchen is a marketplace of rumors and remedies. Cooks compare notes on which grocer stocks the extra-strength syrup and which local apothecary will look the other way if you ask for a little more opium than strictly necessary. The footman, who suffers from gout of the heart, is regularly spotted eyeing the locked cabinet where the family's patent medicines are kept. If the lady of the house is missing her nerve tonic, she may find it has mysteriously migrated to the servants' quarters, always with a convincing story. "Oh, miss, I thought it was just the cough syrup." Honest. There's a constant low-grade war for control of the medicinal supplies. Housekeepers count bottles with the precision of military quartermasters. Any reduction in the contents of a bottle is met with a round of suspicious glances and solemn promises that it's for the best, ma'am. The butler, dignified even when slightly tipsy on restorative bitters, quietly reminds everyone that discretion is the first duty of service. It's not all subterfuge and supply theft. Sometimes the sharing of medicines is a gesture of solidarity. Mary might press a bottle of her best liniment into your hand when you're looking pale, or the cook will slip you a dose of Mrs. Allen's pink pills with your morning tea and a wink. There's a sense that you're all in this together, united by exhaustion, aches, and a mutual need for a brief escape from the grind. The line between mistress and maid, master and footman, blurs in the flickering candlelight of shared desperation. Occasionally, the lines of communication cross, and you hear stories from the other great houses. A valet who fainted in the pantry after mistaking Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup for the port. A cook who cured a cold and gained a week of vivid hallucinations thanks to Dr. Tuttle's invigorating compound. The servants' hall is an underground pharmacy, a place where recipes are swapped with stories, and everyone is always on the lookout for something stronger, faster, or simply new. The house's social order is never more equal than in those quiet moments of medicinal truce. In the dead of night, when the master is asleep and the mistress is finally resting, you might find Mary in the scullery, passing a flask to the gardener, who claims it's for the rheumatics. Nobody asks too many questions. After all, in a house full of secrets, what's one more dose between friends? Upstairs, you pretend not to notice the missing syrup. Downstairs, the bottles are carefully refilled with water or something that vaguely resembles the original. Everyone plays along because sometimes the real cure for what ails you is knowing you're not alone in your search for relief. In the end, the secret world of the servants' medicine is just another part of Victorian survival. You look the other way, they keep the wheels turning, and everyone lives to face another day, just a little more comfortably, and perhaps a little more quietly than before. So here we are, drifting gently towards sleep at the end of another long, ghostly Victorian day. A day of corsets, consultations, and more questionable pharmaceuticals than a 1980s rock tour. If you're still awake, congratulations. You survived the laudanum-laced labyrinth, the morphine madness, and that omnipresent, soul-crushing diagnosis of female nerves. Tonight, as you nestle into your modern bed, pillows soft, sheets clean, no arsenic in sight, maybe whisper a little thank you to your 19th century ancestors. They endured it all, the fainting fits, the silent suffering, the sleepless nights fueled by patent remedies and polite desperation. They wandered through life part-way between worlds, half present, half floating somewhere above the dinner table, sustained by sheer resilience and a suspicious amount of cough syrup. There's something strangely beautiful about it, though, this absurd history of struggle and survival, of women outlasting not just the patriarchy, but the side effects. Because if history teaches us anything, it's that people can put up with almost anything, as long as there's a little hope at the bottom of the bottle. So as you close your eyes tonight, remember, your ancestors didn't have Netflix, running water, or the faintest idea what gluten was, but they did have grit, creativity, and the world's weirdest sleep aids. Let that remind you to be grateful for hot showers, Tylenol, and a society that, usually, doesn't treat a case of the Mondays with straight heroin. History might be full of misery and ridiculousness, but it's also a testament to the human habit of muddling through, one foggy morning at a time. Sleep well, dream sweetly, and don't worry. The ghosts of Victorian women are just grateful someone finally put the laudanum away. Good night.